I think thriving in the face of suffering for me has been about accepting the pain and dealing with it, and then the opportunity for growth, because not being bogged down by all these issues that haven't been looked at. I think the group is a bonding experience because people are sharing at such a vulnerable, deep level, all of us, our hurts, that maybe we've never spoken out loud before to anybody. A level of trust grows, which I think in turn adds strength and encouragement to share. It's also stimulating to hear other people's hurts, because I think some hurts are universal, and then that might bring to mind some that we've had too. The journaling part has been very helpful for me, and I've never journaled so much in my life as I have since I started this group. And I think the beauty for me is I'm able to write down any little thought, no matter how minute or how embarrassing or how shameful. Then there's a choice to speak it or not. But just getting it out instead of having it twirl around in my head has been a huge relief and freedom. When I heard the question, what do you want to get out of the class? What came to my mind immediately was resolution with my parents. I've always had internal conflict with them, maybe not external, but internal, just not felt a closeness that a lot of people feel toward their parents, and realizing I had a part in it as well as they did. I've also got more resolution with myself and who I am and self-acceptance, and that's been quite a wonderful gift. The gift of grief for me has been gaining more acceptance to what is each day, because not being able to control giving had been a way of controlling too, I think, also. Not the best of motives. And to not be able to do that anymore, and having to be open to receive, and allowing that brokenness, out of that came, for me, a way closer connection with God, and more dependence and trust upon God and other people. I've found that good grief can be an invitation and an adventure. I think I've come from a scared place a lot, always thinking, what am I going to do next, or what did I do wrong before? And this allows for letting go of those issues and unhealed places, and loving them and bringing them present allows for more presence. The personal mythology part, I interpret that as the stories I made up about my life, seeing my own mythology, and it really is a myth that I've created. I think now I have the opportunity to let go of the parts I don't like. The term that Darlene presented to us was post-traumatic growth. That concept has been very helpful for me to just realize, just in my daily life, if something negative happens, it can be an opportunity that I perceive as negative, can be an opportunity for growth. All the so-called losses of my life have been opportunities for growth. As I look back, there's always been a gift there in the midst of the losses. I think we call this good grief because acknowledging, realizing, accepting the positive aspects of grief, and by loving those losses and those griefs, we have the opportunity to grow. I believe it's possible to accept grief with love and gratitude. I think we learn within the group from the support and safety that Darlene provides with her experience, and also the other people in the group, the bonding that happens. I think it's the first step in learning to trust that we're going to be okay with what happens to us, and that other people have experienced these things too, are not alone. And then that just increased trust for me of God and other people, and myself. I've had the opportunity to go with Darlene into the Deer Ridge Correctional Institute and be with a group of inmates there. And that has been especially profound because they have had oftentimes extremely painful childhoods. And it becomes evident because of their early lives how they could end up in prison because of that deep hurt. To see tears flowing out of people labeled as criminals is an experience in itself to the profoundness of this good grief work. So this was one of our experiences in the group, was to take an item and break it and then piece it back together. And so this was a cup my husband Brian was one of my losses 12 years ago. This was a cup I bought for him on a trip, and so I chose to break this cup, and my experience with putting it back together was, it's certainly not the same and it's not functional anymore, but what I realized as I put it back together, that it was hard work and it wasn't something that happened overnight. And after he died, I really wanted to be together overnight, and I worked hard at that and presenting that to other people. But this, it helped me realize that, wow, when a person has a big loss, you aren't going to just overnight be back the way you were. In fact, you'll never be back the way you were. And this also, there's a big hole here. There's a piece that was way too chipped up. I just couldn't get it back together. And this hole is like, I have a hole where he was, and that's okay. I can live with that. Yeah, we have sad places in our hearts and disappointments and losses, but we don't have to deny them anymore. I don't feel like I have to deny them anymore. It's accepting them. It's a part of who I am. Darlene provided a whole bunch of National Geographic magazines that were full of various pictures, and one of the exercises was where we were, where we are now, and where we'd like to be. This is where I was. This is where I felt like I was that day, trying to kind of seeing the light above. It's the sun's coming in now, but still pushing through the ice. It's hard work. This is where I wanted to be, is dancing. I'm not really a dancer, but the lightness of dancing and just kind of ethereal, I think this picture is. When I first heard Darlene talk about good grief, I immediately felt very, very drawn, because I had had bereavement classes before, after my husband died, and also I was a volunteer for hospice, but I never did experience anything like what I heard her talking about, and I immediately wanted to have the opportunity to do it. I would encourage others with their issues of grief now to just embrace it and accept and love it.
Grief, like in my life, it had been manifest through anger and violence, and I didn't like where it was leading me and wanted to change that aspect of it. I was tired of being controlled by it. I grew up in an abusive home. Alcohol, drug abuse, physical abuse, and was put in situations where there was even sexual abuse. I trusted few people, so when I did lose those people, that grief was intensified even more. I didn't know where to start, and my trust around women was even less. So it took a real leap of faith to even approach Darlene. Told me that yes, good grief was something I really wanted to pursue. I felt that I could learn a lot from it. What you resist persists, and by embracing my grief, I'm able to deal with it. I've learned that it has a beauty to it, and that by exploring it and by embracing it, I've found a new heightened sense of joy. Probably one of the greatest things that I've received from it is being able to smile again and be able to be happy and content with who I am. I look forward to exploring it more and embracing it more and having more of an intimate relationship with my grief as the classes proceed. When I was in the class the first day, the vulnerability that the men showed, even to the point of tears, told me I wasn't alone. It showed me that it was okay to express those feelings, that other men do that. I actually at one point thought that I was incapable of being empathetic, incapable of having empathy for others or feeling other people. I thought that I was void of emotion, that I couldn't have those, and that I alienated myself because of those thoughts, those feelings. Most of my healings come from those guys in that group and gals, from the vulnerability that they express and they trust me with, and the empathy that they show me is far beyond anything I ever thought I was even deserving of. And I found myself able to empathize with them because I had been through what a lot of them had been through, and I was able to see that I could feel, that I was human, and that brought me a extreme sense of joy. When that revelation came through, it was like I was walking on clouds. It was actually a shock when people actually cared what I had to say, or people thought that what I had to say was something of value. I've had people, since I've joined Good Grief, tell me I was an inspiration to them, and that's astonishing to me. I have a hard time even believing it still, because of my changed perspective and because of my willingness to change and to embrace my grief. I think that for the first time in my life I truly have thrived. I'm being blessed everywhere I turn, and it's because of the changes I'm making, and those changes are primarily because of my ability to deal with my grief now and to embrace it as a friend. I think what holds most people back is the fear of trying something new, the fear of doing it. I think that it's true because when they see that it works, when they see people changing, someone like me who's been in and out of incarcerations, who's lived a life of anger, of violence, of hatred, of not wanting to live, if they can see somebody like me change, truly change, and truly embrace that, then it erodes that fear. If you want to experience a new sense of joy, a new sense of happiness, enlightenment, if you want to experience those things, I challenge you, take that challenge, embrace grief, change your perspective of it, view it as a friend. I guarantee that you would have profound changes in your life, and that you would be more happy, more content, more joyful, more peaceful. You'll be able to love, you'll be able to look at life and see beauty in everything. Through embracing your grief, you'll find strengths that you never thought you were capable of. The saying that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step holds so true when it comes to dealing with your grief or any emotion. Encourage people and challenge them to take that step, you know. It's life-changing. It won't only change you, it'll change those around you.
What's behind men is shame. Shame of how they feel, shame of who they are, shame of just about everything. Being vulnerable is a good thing. They need to find their own power. Men need to find their power back. Women are finding theirs, and men are kind of stuck out in the middle of no man's land, and they just need to find who they are. It's like you gotta learn how to be a boy again before you be a man. For me, I have to remember what that is, what specifically that was, and what I missed. When I first came to the group, it was all women, and walking through the door and seeing all women in there was shocking, to say the least. I wasn't expecting all women. At the same time, I really wasn't expecting a lot of guys either, but it was grief group, and I had a feeling that there was going to be guy issues in the grief thing, but I had my own women issues, so it worked out fine. They struggle as much as guys do in getting in touch with how they feel. And there's a softness to them that I haven't experienced as they do, as witnessing them go through their own grief. It was a softening of my own psyche. The women, for me, was great. It was exactly what I needed at the exact time on there. I didn't need a bunch of guys. I needed to hear from women. So it worked out great. In personal mythology, I learned it was how powerful a myth can be in our own minds, how we make this stuff up in our own minds, and what a grip that has on people. And it's a terrible thing. My personal myth was shame. Shame and I don't matter, or you don't matter. That's what I learned. God, I have so many of them. I'm responsible for everybody's feelings, responsible for all kinds of stuff that I've been holding on to for years. Some of the stuff that I got in trouble with was relationships, were really hard. Most of my stuff was based on rejection. I didn't even realize I was doing the one thing that I didn't want to happen. I was creating by picking these people that would reject me. It's a lot to admit and accept that you're actually picking people to reject you. And that transforming that myth it's not something that happens overnight. I have these moments where things are clear and just brief instances of everything's okay and I'm where I'm supposed to be, which is an entirely new feeling for me. When you have those aha moments, those moments where it's like everything's okay, stuff I've never felt before. You're not going to get that out there. You're going to have to find it in yourself. And you got to take a really hard look at yourself. But it's worth it.
When I came into this group, I was very apprehensive about talking about grief at all, and certainly about talking about it in a group. At first it was overwhelming, being in the group and having everyone talk about their grief, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna be really hard. And then I found as we continued on that being with the group was really, really powerful, much more powerful than working one-on-one with someone. Over time, it just became easier. I think it was because everybody else was sharing, and that created a safe environment. And it did feel like we were all in like a big hug. Like it was a very, very safe environment. We were enclosed and safe. And then I did open up, and trust became quite easy, and it was very easy for me to share with others. So I definitely walked in day one not knowing if I was going to do it, not knowing if I was going to be able to trust or open up. And then as the weeks progressed, I would definitely completely opened up and was willing to share anything and everything, as was everybody else in the group. So it just became an almost undescribable safe cocoon experience. Well, the interesting thing about the journal for me was that I found it very important for myself to want to keep everything that I could in one place. So when we did projects or journaling or had handouts, and even emails, we communicated over email sometimes, I didn't want that stuff scattered around. I needed it to be all in one spot. So it's all in here, and it's all incorporated. And it's very precious to me. Out of the projects that we did in Good Grief, I think one of the most potent ones, which is also looks like the most simple, was the weaving. And this is what I made, and this was kind of the process. So what we did is we would take our loss line. So this is representing different experiences in our life. So this is where we would experience loss. So we would take a string and place it, and it would represent a life experience where we experience loss. And then we would take these other strings, which represented light, our true self, the truth of who we are, our spirit, and then we would weave it in through all of the loss. And that was a huge lesson for me itself, but then bringing it into this experience of doing something physically with my hands brought it into a different level. I always had this idea that loss was about getting over it, pretending it didn't happen, ignoring it, or, resolving it and then it's gone. But this experience was more, no, you embrace it. You embrace it and you weave it in along with the light. And that was very powerful. The weaving was a very powerful lesson for me. It was very revolutionary and different from anything that I'd ever learned before. So what's different here is we take the darkness so it no longer controls us in our subconscious. We look at it and see all the different angles, and then we pour love on it. And we put it on our altar and we honor it. And that is a very different experience for me than any of the other work that I've done. I really took off with the personal mythology and the invitation to write and to create stories. Finding my myths. It was like going on an archaeological dig. And we were constantly doing these different practices, and all of these different myths would pop up. And it was interesting, it wasn't just one, there was quite a slew of them. And then there was one that I found for me that was the predominant myth of, my early childhood, what I can hear reverberating in the back of my head even when I don't pay attention. So finding all of these myths was incredibly empowering, and then weaving them into a story was a really wonderful way to begin to explore where they came from, why they're there, what it is they're trying to teach me. I think it was our last lesson that we did that was the most powerful for me, that really brought the whole experience together. And that was when we held our myth in one hand and our counter myth in the other hand. And then we brought them together and experienced the center point, and it wasn't a negating of either, it was an honoring of both, and then a bringing them together to where we realize that both are true. It's not either or, it's and. I've always had a tendency to think where I'm always supposed to live in the light, and everything's always supposed to be happy, and it's all supposed to be good, and if there's darkness, we just push that away. And this was like, no, we don't stay in the dark and suffer, but we don't live in the light and pretend there is no darkness. It's both. It's an honoring of both. And that has been, I think, what has stuck with me the most. The guided meditations rocked my world. They were pretty amazing. And it was interesting because it was just so subtle. We would just sit or lay quietly, and Darlene would guide us through the meditation. And it just seems so simple, but my spirit just dove into those meditations. I had amazing experiences. So I really loved working with the art. It was really powerful for me. I tend to work more with words in my life. I like to journal and write, so I'm used to working with words. But working with images opened up a different part of my mind, a different room, brought new things to light, and gave me material to work with that was different than if I just worked with words. So I've done a lot of spiritual paths and journeys through my life, but I found Good Grief to be particularly powerful for me because it took everything I thought I knew and brought it into a new light.